So who is Jesus Christ? You know, if you pick up the New Testament looking for one simple answer, well, you're not going to find it. What you get instead is this incredible gallery of powerful, really distinct portraits. In this explainer, we're going to dive into the work of scholar Frank J. Matera to figure out how all these different depictions actually create one unified vision of Jesus as Messiah and Lord of all.
All right, so here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with the big question of all this diversity. Then we'll journey through the Gospels, see what the very first Christians were actually preaching, get into the mind-blowing theology of the Apostle Paul, look at the exalted Christ in later writings, and then, at the end, we'll pull it all together.
Okay, let's start by setting the stage. If you've ever spent time reading the New Testament, you've probably had this feeling that Jesus seems a little different depending on which book you're in. That's not a mistake, and it's not a contradiction. In fact, that's the whole question we're digging into today.
I mean, think about it. Is he the wise teacher up on the mountain? Is he the suffering Savior on a cross? The judge who's coming back one day? Is he a man specially chosen by God? Or is he actually God himself? These aren't just questions we ask now. The very first Christian writers were wrestling with these exact same things.
And this whole field of study has a name. It's called Christology. It's basically the deep dive into figuring out who Jesus is and what he was all about. And when we talk about New Testament Christology, we're getting into the nitty-gritty of how the first people who followed him tried to put into words the identity of this person they had met.
This is where our guide, Frank Matera, really helps us out. He makes this powerful argument that we shouldn't see these different portraits as contradictions at all. Instead, he says they're like complementary witnesses, each one showing us a different facet of a single, incredible reality. Let's see how that works.
We're going to start where most people start, the four Gospels. You got to remember, these authors aren't just writing biographies. They are painting theological portraits, carefully choosing which stories and details to include to answer that huge question. Who is this Jesus?
Okay, take a look at this. This chart really lays it out. You've got Matthew, who presents Jesus as this new Moses, the great teacher who fulfills all of Israel's hopes. Then you have Mark, showing us this mysterious, powerful Son of Man whose true identity is really revealed through his suffering. Luke's angle? He paints Jesus as the Savior for everyone, Jews, Gentiles, you name it. And then there's John. John just starts in a whole different league. This verse from John's Gospel, it's just one of the most profound statements about Jesus ever written. John is saying that Jesus is the eternal Word, the very reason and wisdom of God, who literally took on a human body. Scholars have a term for this. They call it a high Christology. It's the most elevated view of Jesus you can imagine, basically identifying him with God from the get-go.
So, the Gospels give us these amazing portraits of Jesus' life. But what happened after his death and resurrection? What was the message about Jesus that the apostles started preaching to the world? Let's check it out.
So if you read the book of Acts, you find these little summaries of the earliest Christian sermons. And there's a fancy word for this core message, the kerygma, which just means the proclamation. And what's so striking is that they didn't just go around talking about his teachings. The absolute center of their message was his death and resurrection, which they believed was God's game-changing act of salvation for the whole world. All right, now we get to probably the most influential thinker in all of early Christianity, the Apostle Paul. His letters, man, that contain some of the deepest, most developed Christology in the entire Bible. Just like Frank Matera really hammers home, for Paul, everything, and I mean everything, came down to this one point. Not just the miracles, not just the teachings, but the shocking, world-shattering event of his crucifixion. That was the heart of his gospel. And this quote just explains the paradox perfectly. Paul knew that telling people your Savior was crucified was, frankly, insane. For his world, the cross was a symbol of total shame, weakness, and failure. But Paul comes along and says, no, you don't get it. In that very act of weakness, that's where the true power and wisdom of God was unleashed for everyone. Paul gives Jesus these titles that are just massive in their scope. He calls him Kyrios, Lord, the very same title used for God in the Old Testament. He calls him the second Adam, the one whose obedience fixes the disobedience of the first Adam. He even says Jesus is the agent of creation itself, that everything was made through him and for him. For Paul, Jesus isn't just a historical figure, he's the key to the entire universe. But the story doesn't stop with Paul. As we move into the later books of the New Testament, we see these ideas develop even further. We get these new, absolutely stunning portraits of the risen and ascended Christ. Take the book of Hebrews. It has this really unique and profound way of looking at Jesus. It presents him as the ultimate high priest. See, the old priests had to offer animal sacrifices over and over again. But Hebrews says Jesus offers himself, one perfect sacrifice for all time. And he doesn't enter some earthly temple, he enters the very presence of God for us.
So what about the last book of the Bible, Revelation? It's filled with all this wild imagery of cosmic battles, but how does it picture Christ, the ultimate victor? Well, the central image it uses is totally counterintuitive.
Yeah, it's not a roaring lion or a conquering general. It's a lamb, looking as though it had been slain. And that is the ultimate paradox. In Revelation, Christ's authority to rule the world comes directly from his sacrificial death, not from brute force. It's like the book is shouting that God's kingdom runs on a totally different power source, self-giving love.
So let's recap. We've seen Jesus as a teacher, a suffering Son of Man, the divine Word, the crucified Lord, a high priest, and a slain lamb. So how on earth does all of this fit together?
And this takes us right back to Matera's big idea. These aren't competing resumes. They are different angles on the same inexhaustible person. It's like looking at a diamond. Every turn reveals a new and brilliant facet, but it's all the same diamond. Each writer is showing us a different angle of who Jesus is.
So Frank Matera argues that even with all this incredible diversity, every single one of these paths, from Mark's suffering Messiah to Paul's cosmic Lord, they all end up at the exact same destination. They converge on one single powerful conclusion.
This is it. This is the unified confession of the entire New Testament. Messiah, that's his role in fulfilling God's promises to Israel. And Lord of all, that declares his divine authority and his reign over every bit of creation, for every person, forever.
And that leaves us with this final thought to chew on. If we only focus on one portrait, Jesus the good teacher, or Jesus the sacrifice, or Jesus the cosmic king, we end up with an incomplete picture. So the real challenge is, what happens if we try to hold them all together? The human and the divine, the suffering and the glorious. How might that change how we see the world and our place in it?